Hello everyone. In this video I will discuss the poet John Clare and his poem The Peasant Poet. A peasant is a person who is an agricultural laborer. You can say that a peasant is a farmer. But before we go into the poem, let's talk about the poet first. First of all, we must know that John Clare was a major 19th century poet. He was born in 1793 and died in 1864. His specialty was that he painted the rural settings in his poems. Mostly he wrote about the countryside. This was mainly because he spent most of his time in a place called Northampton. And that is why he is also known as Northamptonshire peasant poet. His biographer, Jonathan Bate, referred to him as a laboring class poet. This was mainly because he wrote about rural childhood and very powerfully about nature. Now let's try to understand the poem. I will try to explain the poem by dividing it into different parts for our convenience and then giving the explanation. In the poem, however, you have two stanzas only. So let's talk about the first four lines. He loved the brook's soft sound, the swallow swimming by. He loved the daisy covered ground, the cloud bedappled sky. You must note that in the first line itself, the pronoun he is placed. This means the speaker might not be the peasant himself, but rather talking about someone who is a peasant. But who is this person? Is the poet talking about his friend? Actually, we are not quite sure at the moment, and it is not right to jump into conclusions right at the beginning. So, we will try to address this question in the end. Apart from this, the speaker tells us that the peasant loved nature's creations, and these are listed in the first stanza itself. The first creation which the peasant loved is the brook. You can say that the brook is a small stream. Here is an example of a brook. It is a small stream. The speaker also tells us that the peasant loved to watch the swallows flying in the air. Swallow is a bird, and the expression of swallow swimming in the air suggests the smooth gliding of the bird in the air. It appeared as if the swallows were flying without any obstruction. Here is the image of a swallow. The speaker further says that the peasant loved the daisy covered ground. This implies that the peasant might have spent a considerable amount of time amidst fields covered with daisies. He also loved to see the clouded sky. He says that the peasant loved dappled sky, meaning it was covered in dots. As you can see in the image here, the clouds are dots in the sky, and this is what dapple means. So the first stanza is basically about the things the peasant loved about nature. Then the poet says, to him the dismal storm appeared, the very voice of God. And when the evening rack was reared, stood Moses with his rod. The speaker says that for the peasant, even the dismal storm appeared to be the very voice of God. Dismal actually means causing a mood of gloom, despondency, sadness, or depression. Just look at what the poet is hinting at here. Even the storm with its thunder appeared to him as the voice of God. This is the power of nature. It has divine qualities, and anyone associated with it will be filled with the feeling of divinity. Even when the peasant was rearing his sheep, or you can say livestock, it appeared as if Moses himself stood beside him. He was actually protected by God. Moses led the life of a shepherd and met God. He delivered laws of God to Israel, and Moses standing beside the peasant is a symbol of divinity. The poet continues to say, and everything his eye surveyed, the insects in the brake. This means the peasant wandered or surveyed to look at the creations of nature. He even surveyed the insects. And here the first stanza ends, and in the final stanza the poet says, where creatures God Almighty made, he loved them for his sake. A silent man in life's affairs, a thinker from a boy, a peasant in his daily cares, a poet in his joy. The peasant loved the insects because they are God's creation. And in the end, the poet gives details about the peasant by placing a hyphen. He says that the peasant works silently far away from the busy urban life, and he is a philosopher, a thinker right from his childhood. He is a peasant who becomes a poet when he is happy or joyful. And then the poem ends. But before we conclude, I want to address the question which I pointed out right in the beginning. Who is the speaker referring to throughout the poem? He was actually talking about himself. The poet or the speaker is a peasant, and the entire poem is about himself. This is why he is also known as Northamptonshire Peasant Poet, which I said right at the beginning. I hope you understood the poem. Thank you very much.